This story is partly a remake of the animated TV series, itself a retelling of the original 1933 film about a tamed Kong who is befriended by a boy and directed to fight for the forces of good. That concept, minus the boy, is combined with the mad scientist story with elements from the then popular spy film genre in Ishiro Honda's 1967 film King Kong Escapes.
Kong! Kong! King Kong!
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor and I am here with Chris, and thank you for joining us today as we continue on with the King Kong franchise. And today we are doing King Kong Escapes, which was another Kong Toho film. They did the King Kong vs. Godzilla in 1962, and then they followed that up with a Kong solo film in this one, in King Kong Escapes. And this is one of the films when I was younger, I did not like this film. I thought it was slow and boring and terrible. And I honestly, Chris, was dreading the the rewatch of this for the podcast. And I ended up watching it, I think probably like 2.5 times within like a week. And
Okay.
and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was like, you know what? I don't know why I didn't like this as a kid. It's very cheesy. Kong and them. There's like a couple good fight scenes, a couple good laughs in the film. So I was like, I don't know why I disliked this so much as a kid, but maybe it was because I was on my, I had such a high appreciation for the Godzilla films. And then the 1976 Kong film, I was very high on that as well. So maybe I watched this and kind of was like, whatever. But on this rewatch, I really enjoyed this. So what did you think of it?
Yeah, it was fun. For a lot of years as a kid, I didn't even know this movie existed. In the internet days, how to look up all the Godzilla movies, but you wouldn't think that. You knew that King Kong versus Godzilla existed. Everyone did, but you wouldn't think to try and find a way. Like me and King Kong Escapes did not cross paths until I was quite a bit older in my probably like my teen years. I've seen it exactly twice now. Once when I was sort of at a teenage age, and then once as for this podcast. And it's far from my favorite King Kong movie, but it is very cool to see more of the kind of Toho interpretation, the Japanese interpretation of a King Kong movie done with the suit, with the man in suit style and things like that. King Kong versus Godzilla had some of the iconography, like the natives and the wall and the sort of a wall that they built, and the picking up the woman and having him in her hand, climbing on a building. You kind of got like the Japanese version of that, and this one gives you some other kind of iterations and ways to kind of like see Japan tackle the idea of a King Kong versus a T-Rex style monster, but done as a suitmation fight instead of stop motion. That's very cool. This is the film that I never, when in Destroy All Monsters, there's the Gorosaurus, and I was like, that thing was never in any other proper Godzilla movie, really. I never understood that. And it's like, yeah, it's from this movie where it was featured heavily. So it's just this interesting, unique kind of Japanese Toho style King Kong movie that it's just another, in the same way that it's really fun to watch Mothra or Rodan or War of the Gargantuas, these other Japanese kaiju films that aren't Godzilla. It just gives you a different look at the genre, and so it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I remember us having, a little talk about this Mechani-Kong like preempting like Mechagodzilla for Godzilla and being like the precursor for that, and like talking about like, like they could have, Toho had the rights for Kong. I believe it was like a year or two after this, or they could have possibly renewed him for longer, and they just let him expire after this film. And it's like,
Yeah, I believe the situation, it was like, I think it was a set number of years, because it was through 1967, and from what I understand, the intention was for King Kong versus Godzilla to be in Destroy All Monsters, and but they were nervous about that because I guess when they would have filmed it would have been within the quote parameters, but when it would possibly have released would maybe have been outside of the years, and so they were nervous about whether or not they could. So they erred on the side of caution with Destroy All Monsters. Otherwise, King Kong would have been in that. Which, good lord, it's like, could we have just been on the timeline where everything happened a year sooner, so that they could have definitively? Because I think this film was 1967, correct? So it's like, if only this could have been the movie we got sooner, and then Destroy All Monsters was the 1967 movie, it all would have been much more like safe and clear. And that dovetails into another fun curiosity, is that if things had gone a little more smoothly, that could have been almost exactly what happened, because Godzilla versus Ebra, or Ebra Horror of the Deep, the Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, that script famously was originally a King Kong script. That's why Godzilla does so many sort of King Kong-like things in that movie. And the American sort of co-producers that had a bit of a say in this were not too keen on that as a King Kong movie, so they wanted to make something that was a bit more, up the alley of what they thought King Kong should be. So Toho just literally took that King Kong script and dropped Godzilla into it and made it, and that became Ebra Horror of the Deep 1966. So, it's a shame, because that could have been their King Kong movie in 1966, and then who knows what might have happened in 1967. It could have possibly been the big crossover Destroy All Monsters that might have happened a year sooner. There's no telling. It's very interesting.
yeah, it definitely would have been a different film with King Kong in Destroy All Monsters, or King Kong against the Sea Monster, or in Ebra Horror of the Deep.
Yeah,
But
when I look back on it, that is one where I'm like, I like Sea Monster. I have a lot of nostalgia for Ebra Horror of the Deep. A lot of nostalgia for it. It was one of my early VHSs of the series, but like, hindsight being 2020, I always think like, man, I just think it would have been better if this had been left off as a King Kong movie. I don't know.
we will never know. So, sometimes you can
I
say only
know.
time will tell.
I know. I can just squint my eyes and I can see King Kong in that movie, and I think I like it better than this movie, maybe.
Yeah, how Godzilla's got like the affection for the girl and whatnot. Those are all King Kong traits.
Yeah. Kumi Mizuno's in there. I like that island adventure story, and it's so King Kong. So it's like, I feel like that would have been a really fun one, and that's the explanation for why Mothra sort of bops Godzilla on the head and kind of isn't really on friendly terms with Godzilla in that movie, because initially it was going to be King Kong, and that was going to be the first time King Kong and Mothra ever encountered. So Mothra would have, like, not really trying to kill King Kong, but is trying to kind of like, outmaneuver him to move along with her business. But that's kind of the explanation there for that.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of information and background on King Kong Escapes. King Kong Escapes, otherwise known as King Kong's Counterattack, is a 1967 kaiju film directed by Ishiro Honda with special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya, and the film was a Japanese-American co-production between Toho and Rankin Bass, and stars Rhodes Reason, Linda Miller, Akira Takarada, Mii Hama, Issei Yamamoto, with Hiro Nakajima as King Kong and Hiroshi Sakita as Mechani-Kong and Gorosaurus. This film is loosely based on Rankin Bass's series The King Kong Show, and was the second and final Toho-produced film featuring King Kong, until its 2021 collaboration with Warner Bros. On Godzilla vs. Kong. King Kong Escapes was released in Japan on July 22, 1967, and then released in the United States on June 19, 1968, and it is the fourth entry in the King Kong franchise. So there's a little information on that.
Yeah, Rankin Bass, famously, the producer of many well-known stop-motion Christmas TV specials, as well as the animated Hobbit movie from 1977, the musical one. So Rankin Bass has a little bit of a fun legacy.
Do you know what animated films that they had done?
Like, I'm pretty sure it's like the TV stop-motion specials of like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and
Okay,
Little
that makes
Drummer Boy.
sense.
It's like most of those. Like, I couldn't name chapter and verse on exactly which ones were and were not them, but a lot of those sort of famous kind of made-for-TV stop-motion animated Christmas specials are the Rankin Bass stuff.
Okay, that's something I didn't know, so I thought as soon as you brought that up, I figured those were what you were talking about,
Mm-hmm.
so I thought I would ask.
Yep.
Well, heck, why don't we go ahead and get into a trailer on the film, get into a plot synopsis, and we'll come back with some fun facts and numbers and all the good stuff from King Kong Escapes.
Let's do it.
King Kong, Mammoth, Behemoth, Goliath. King Kong escapes and meets his greatest foe, the Kong of Steel. A gargantuan duel, unmatched by any battle in history. Thundering 60-foot robot Kong of Steel, creation of the evil Doctor Who, criminal genius who stops at nothing. Kong, once again, dig! King Kong shakes the earth. King Kong fights for life against the copter squadron. A thousand thrills as King Kong battles the serpent of Mondo Island.
Not his Kong!
Hits himself against the nation's armament. And plunges a beautiful girl into a world of terror. King Kong in a duel to the death.
An evil genius named Doctor Who creates Mechani-Kong, a mecha version of King Kong, to dig for the highly radioactive element X, found only at the North Pole. Mechani-Kong enters an ice cave and begins to dig into a glacier, but the radiation destroys its brain circuits and the robot shuts down. Doctor Who then sets his sights on getting the real Kong to finish the job. The scientist is taken to task by a female overseer, Madame Piranha, whose country's government is financing the Doctor's schemes and frequently berates him for his failure to get results. Meanwhile, a submarine commanded by Carl Nelson arrives at Mondo Island, where the legendary King Kong lives. Here, the giant ape gets into an intense fight with a giant dinosaur Gorosaurus and a sea serpent. He falls in love with Lieutenant Susan Watson, following the footsteps of Ann Darrow from the 1933 film. Doctor Who subsequently goes to Mondo Island, abducts Kong, and brings him back to the base at the North Pole. Kong is hypnotized by a flashing light device and fitted with a radio earpiece. Who commands Kong to retrieve Element X from the cave. Problems with the earpiece ensue, and Who has to kidnap Susan Watson, the only person who can control Kong. After Watson and her fellow officers are captured by Who, Madame Piranha unsuccessfully tries to seduce Nelson to bring him over to her side. Eventually, Kong escapes and swims all the way to Japan, where the climactic battle with Mechani-Kong transpires. The two giants face off at the Tokyo Tower in the finale. Kong prevails and destroys Mechani-Kong and kills Who and his men. Then Kong triumphantly swims back to his island home. All right, let's hop into some numbers here on King Kong Escapes. The budget of King Kong Escapes was 170 million yen or 422,000 US dollars, and it had a box office return of $3 million in 1967. So, Chris, what are our inflation numbers for those?
Yeah, so that would be roughly equivalent to about a 3.9 million budget today and a roughly $28.3 million box office return today.
So that's not bad. You know, it multiplied its budget by what? 9
Yeah, something like
roughly.
that. Yeah, even if you say the budget was 4 million, that would be over 28, so that would be over 7 times the budget even if you round the budget up to 4.
Yeah, so this made pretty good money in 1967, and what's crazy is not a lot of Godzilla films were doing even good numbers like that, and this one did pretty well for itself.
Yeah, and I mean you have to consider at that point there had been something like, depending on if this was before or after Son of Godzilla, you're talking about 5, 6, 7, like 8ish Godzilla movies. I think Ghidorah was number 5, Monster Zero was 6, Ebra was 7, and Son of Godzilla was 8. So you're talking about 8 Godzilla movies, and this is only the 4th King Kong movie ever. And in these earlier days, King Kong has a sort of a character, an icon of pop culture, coming from the 30s. Like King Kong was kind of a bit more like globally famous, and it had a bit more reverence. Godzilla was getting there, but King Kong kind of had that legendary status for decades. And this is, only the second time that Japan was making a King Kong movie, and the first time they were doing just a King Kong movie. So there's a lot of, aspects. And, at this point, Godzilla movies were being directed by Jun Fukuda, who was sort of starting out, and they weren't getting as much of the high tier sort of budget and production value and talent. And Ebra and Son of Godzilla were those sort of, they're perceived as the sort of cheap island Godzilla movies where you just throw them on an island, not a whole lot of uh scenery and cities and destruction and miniatures. It's just kind of guys in suits on islands with minimal work otherwise. But King Kong Escapes, you've got Ishiro Honda directing it. You've got it's a big kind of bit of a globe trotting plot line. Like it's still an A kind of production, whereas some of the Godzilla movies at this time had kind of become a little bit more of B tier productions.
Yeah, and I mean, along with those island Godzilla films, you save a lot of money not making those miniatures when you can just like throw some islands together. Do some. You don't have really any miniatures. What did Son of Godzilla have? Like 2 or 3 buildings on the entire island. So I mean, when you come to this film, and it has that $422,000 budget or 170 million yen, and it makes 3 million back then. It multiplies its budget by 8, 9 times. That's a pretty, compared to other monster films that were going on at the time. That's pretty phenomenal numbers.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Well, I'll give you some more numbers. IMDb has this film rated a 5.5 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes has it at a 63%, so it's a little above an approval rating. We'll take it. Metacritic killed this film with only a 41% rating. Our Google users helped us out because, as always, they're clicking away. That's our high one. 87% of Google users like this film.
There you go. I don't know if yeah, I'd say that's a little high for this one. Maybe, I don't know if I'd agree that it's an 87, but that's a little high. But that's okay. If 87% of those Google users like it, then God bless them.
Well, for a monster film, I think I approve of it. I'd probably give it like a solid C rating.
That's what I was about to say. Like it's not anywhere near a top tier, but it's not one of the worser examples. I don't know. Grammar is not my strong suit. I love to talk, but I don't know how much my command of grammar is. I don't know.
Well, I'll give you the good numbers because what is this film, about 95 minutes long or so? 100 minutes long.
Yeah, depending on which cut you're watching. Which I watched allegedly, according to Wikipedia, the 8-minute shorter US cut of the film. I'm not intimately aware of what the changes and alterations are for the US edition, but I'd have to do a little bit of research on that.
I watched the US version as well, and I'll get into a fun fact about that here in a second, but
Okay.
to finish off numbers, I'll give you Kong is on screen for 20 minutes and 45 seconds, or just about 21.5% of the film, with his first appearance at about 18.5 minutes, or about 19% into the film. So we get some good Kong action here, and we also get, like you said, a little bit of Gorosaurus, we got a little sea serpent in there for a couple seconds, and then we get Mechani-Kong.
Yeah, and
So we got some good monster
that's
action.
yeah, and forgive me for not being the expert in knowing, but that is not Manda, correct? That is not the famous and well-known official monster of Manda. That's just a sea serpent, correct?
Yes, I'm not
Okay.
100% on that, but reading
Yeah.
the plot of the film,
Yeah.
it just called it Sea Serpent, so
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm not here to argue of whether or not they might have used the model and adjusted the sort of the prop. I'm sure the prop is sort of the basis of it is Manda, but I was wondering if officially it was. But yeah, it's listed even on old Wikizilla as giant sea serpent, which is odd. It's like, why not just make it Manda? But each to their own.
yeah, or some other extinct, sea creature, something like that.
Mhm.
That's all I have for numbers for you. I'll go straight into the fun facts, and this is the one I was talking about for the version of the film. And it's the original Japanese version of this film has never officially been released in the West in any form of media. So we have never received that in any DVD, Blu-ray, in any type of form over here.
Wow, yeah, it would take somebody, I know that Criterion had to do some loop-de-loops to get the Japanese cut of King Kong versus Godzilla as a bonus feature in their set, because the parameters, it's the same kind of deal essentially Universal had with Toho for both of these, which is you have Toho has all the rights to the Japanese cut in Japan, and Universal has all of the rights to the US version in the US or outside of Japan, but they can't like cross over. Like Universal does not have the rights to release the Japanese version in the US, and Toho doesn't really have the rights to release the US version in Japan. So anytime anyone wants to, like, if a US company wants to have both, you kind of have to get the movie in its US form from Universal and then kind of go and do another kind of sub deal to get the Japanese cut as some kind of like bonus material or something like that. So it's a unique thing, and King Kong versus Godzilla is big enough that they'll make that happen, but who knows if that will ever properly happen for King Kong Escapes.
AKA, it's a huge pain in the neck.
Yeah, a very unique situation, because it's not just like, oh, Toho has the rights and who's the US distributor. It's, well, Toho has the rights to their version. There's an American distributor with exclusive rights to a US version. So you can't just be a distributor in the US. From what I understand, you can't just say like, oh, well, even though Universal has the American cut, we're just going to license the Japanese version and do that on our own. Like, it's like restrictive in that sense. It's like, no, like it must go through Universal. It's a unique thing from what I understand, and I'm sure they weren't thinking about home video at the time. They weren't thinking about. I mean, in the '60s, VHS and DVD weren't a thing. So these are like old deals that are then being updated into new formats. So it's a very unique situation.
Well, maybe Criterion Collection or something will hit us with that someday. They'll work a deal out, but
Yeah,
only time will tell.
maybe they'll do the King Kong box set. Who knows? Who knows?
It'd be a lot less films that we could keep it all in one.
Yeah, you have to think it'd be easier to wrangle. What is it, 8, something like that? I don't know.
Yeah,
Well,
including the newer ones, maybe 10 total.
yeah, pre MonsterVerse. We got to at least give them to that. We won't expect them to get the MonsterVerse movies, but pre MonsterVerse would be what, the 2 from the 30s, the 2 from the 60s, the 70s and 80s. That's 6, and then what? King Kong 05 would make 7. So I mean,
Yeah.
you could do that. You could swing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Criterion, get on it for us.
Well, especially because I mean Universal has several of them. So it's not like they got to make deals with 7 different companies, a number of those films are with, one company like Universal. So I feel like that's a doable. I feel like that's a box set that needs to happen. Someone needs to call up Criterion and make that happen.
Yeah, we need a box set so we can
Yeah,
see
give
the
us
extra 8 minutes of King Kong escapes.
yeah, give us the classics. Give us that the 7 original King Kong movies. Why not?
Oh, I'll get back to some fun facts for you. We talked about this one a little earlier, and this was the second and last film made by Toho to use the King Kong character. Their rights to use him lapsed after this film, and they reverted back to RKO.
Mm. That's the way it goes, and it's shocking. It's like they could have made as many movies as they wanted with King Kong in that span of 4, 5, 6 years that they had it. It's like they could have done 5 King Kong movies. They could have done 3 King Kong versus Godzilla movies. They were originally going to make a direct sequel. It's like you would think. It's funny how stuff like that just they just let it go and they just didn't get around to it. It's like nowadays, if a deal like that were made, you would make the maximum number of movies you could within those parameters.
Yeah, I mean, as Toho, I mean, you still had so many monsters up to that point. So give us a King Kong versus Ghidorah or a King Kong versus Rodan, and there's so many options you could have done, or do a solo film or something where King Kong is affected by radiation and gets his own atomic breath, or do something crazy. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The way King Kong kills Gorosaurus in this film by tearing his jaws apart is the same way the original King Kong kills the Tyrannosaurus in the 1933 original King Kong film.
Yeah, it was a great nod, great tribute. I loved seeing that basically essentially that same scene reinterpreted as a suitmation battle, and it's like part of the legacy. You watch the 30s, you get the stop motion version, you watch this, you get the suitmation version, you watch the 2005 film and you get the CGI animated version. So it's a very cool piece of sort of cinematic legacy.
And even in the 76 film, it's not a T-Rex, but that King Kong tears open a snake's jaws in the same manner as well.
Yeah, they do their own lame version of it. That's not a T-Rex. That's fine. That's fine.
That Skull Island in that film, or whatever I can't remember exactly if that's what they call it in that film, is a little less extravagant as some of the other
A
in
little
this.
bland. Yep.
Yeah. Linda Miller was modeling in Japan when she was cast in this film. Producer Arthur Rankin tracked her down after seeing her work because he felt she would be perfect for the role. They met and he hired her immediately, and Linda Miller was only 18 at the time.
Jeez. Yeah. I mean, it adds up. Not that anything in this movie is an Oscar caliber performance, but she does seem like a not very polished actress, and you know, but you have to imagine if you're looking for something in Japan, like the odds of finding a sort of attractive young blonde American woman that you can cast in your giant monster movie, it's got to be slim to none. So it probably didn't take much to get these kind of roles.
I believe Linda Miller was at G Fest. I don't think it was this past year, 2024, but I think she came to G Fest in Chicago in 2023. I didn't go or get the chance to meet her, but that would have been cool to go there and meet her. But it was cool that she was there and showed up because I have been to G Fest before. So I thought that was worth mentioning that she had came there
Yeah.
it was 2023.
Yeah, she has some of the more infamous lines in this movie, Kong, put me down, Kong,
King
it's like,
Kong.
yeah, it's this great little thing where it seems like there's like just certain lines, it feels like she starts and ends every sentence with Kong, Kong, don't rock the boat, Kong, that's where I eat and sleep, Kong, like, she.
And she is not acting it out very well, but I'll give her a pass for this was probably her
Yeah,
first film, or it had to be
yeah.
one of her first films.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's fun. That's, kind of part of the charm of it. I imagine it's got to be so difficult to be the way they filmed these movies that have the American actors and the Japanese actors. They would just have them both perform in their languages and dancing around the other actors performing in the other language. Just like, this is when you say this line and you're not really interacting or playing off of each other or understanding each other, and you're just kind of, it feels like it would be such a difficult thing to do as a performer, and they just kind of do it, and like they just kind of roll with it, and they're like, oh well, we'll dub the Americans into Japanese for the Japanese cut, and dub all the Japanese into English for the English cut, and then just roll with it from there. It's like, man, that just seems like it would be very difficult on set to do. You speak a line in English, and then they return their line in Japanese, and then you speak back in English as if you both understand each other. It's got to be wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, you have to you have to be on point with your lines at that point.
Yeah, no room for improv, no room for any. It's like, gosh, it seems like a nightmare.
Yeah. No, thank you. 2 King Kong suits were made for this film. The arms of the first suit were very long, so Hiro Nakajima's hands did not reach those of the suit. He had to grasp onto sticks that were attached onto the hands of the suit. And then he also wore a second suit with shorter arms whenever they were shooting scenes of King Kong battling other monsters. As with Toho's previous King Kong suit, used in the film King Kong vs. Godzilla from 1962 and the American adaptation of 63, Nakajima was sewn shut inside of this suit.
Wow, fantastic.
I would like to
and
say I do prefer the King Kong suit in King Kong vs. Godzilla to this one.
yeah, I almost rudely cut you off when you were like, they made 2 suits for this, and I'm like, and both of them are ugly as hell. Neither one of them is, they're both faces only a mother could love.
Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah, they're trying, I guess. I mean, I don't think any of the, I don't think any of these Toho King Kong looks they all seem a little odd and off. I don't think any of them quite nail the King Kong suitmation look the way anyone would want it. We're not at Planet of the Apes just yet. In these 60s King Kong movies, in terms of the ape face animatronics.
Not at all. That's one of the things that might have killed it for me as a kid. I was just like, King Kong is so ugly in this film, and I think even as a kid I thought it looked kind of fake. So I might have just skipped it for that reason. But now, growing up, rewatching it, I have fun with the cheesiness that it is.
Looking over some of the details here, I might owe Linda Miller a bit of an apologies in terms of the performance, because apparently for the English dub of the movie, she is not voicing her own character. There's someone else who's voicing Susan Watson as a character. So that's not Linda Miller necessarily. That's not her performance. It's not her voice for that. That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah, because they've got these listed here, like Rhodes Reason. He's his voice. He's Carl Nelson still, but that's not Linda Miller as the voice of Susan Watson. That's fascinating.
Well, I'll get to one last fun fact for you, and then we'll move on and see who we picked for our favorite character and whatnot.
Sounds good.
When fighting Gorosaurus, the King Kong suit is very clearly falling apart. And at one point in the film, when Gorosaurus throws King Kong off of himself and Kong flips over, part of the King Kong neck peels off and you can see the suit actor inside.
Oh wow, fantastic. I'd have to go back and really look at that. You kind of just let the movies wash over you when you're watching, but like, I'm sure it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, it kind of ruins that part of the movie for you, or if
Yeah.
you're watching it with someone else, you're like, look.
Yeah, there's a famous moment. I don't know if we talked about this when we talked about Godzilla versus Gigan or not, but there's a famous close-up of Anguirus when he gets his snout slashed open by Gigan's chest buzzsaw. And it's one of these things where, it goes right into his face and the blood splurts into the camera. And so all you're ever seeing is like the violence of it. But if you actually look, if you pause it and look, you can literally see the hands of the crew member in the frame that are ramming the Anguirus head into the buzz saw, and then the blood's flowing in the camera. You can literally see the hand holding the prop to push it into the saw and get the cut and get this blood splurting. And now it's one of those things. It's like even in that split second moment, like I can't not see it.
I did not notice that, and I never have paid that close
Oh
attention.
my gosh!
Now I gotta
never
watch
did
that.
I never did either. I even watched like moments like that, like the blood splurting, like in slow motion, and didn't notice it. But like you can absolutely see it, and it's crazy.
Now I gotta
It's
put in
it's
Godzilla vs. Gigan before I go to bed and check it out.
yeah. Watch it in super slow motion, and you'll see. It's wild. It's wild.
I will absolutely check that out. All right, Chris, on to the good stuff. Who was your favorite character of King Kong Escapes?
So I'm gonna say, King Kong probably not allowed. We never are allowed to pick the monsters in these, as much as I would have liked to pick Akira Takarada's character because he's such a familiar face in these movies. I went with kind of a tie between Carl Nelson as the hero and Doctor Who as the villain, just because Doctor Who was such a kind of like a unique case of a human antagonist in one of these movies and a fun name. So, but yeah, I'll say Carl Nelson. He's kind of got like the macho American guy in the cast of Japanese actors and actresses. And it's fun to have a standout character like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of went. He was one of the. I kind of had a tie between Commander Jiro, Susan, and then Commander Carl Nelson. I was like, clearly Susan. She was never going to be my favorite. She was just kind of like a tag along for Kong. There's always a girl for Kong in these films. And like you said, Carl Nelson, he's like the big, kind of baddie of the film. And then you got Commander Jiro, who, he's tagging along as well. And I don't have a lot to say about him, but I just liked how they worked together as a trio. So, I mean, I kind of cheated. So, like, the trio of them three is who I ended up choosing. But if I had to choose one, I would have did the same as you and went with Carl Nelson in the film.
Yeah, nice.
For my favorite score for the film, I ended up choosing Starting Mechani-Kong 2. And I listened to the soundtrack a couple times, as I always do. And this one, by the time I got to this one, I was like, yep, that's the one. And then I continued listening to the soundtrack. And this soundtrack specifically is used multiple times in the film, like in different scenarios and whatnot. And it has like 3 or 4 different names on the soundtrack. So, I mean, I can't remember a bunch of the other ones. It was like Starting Mechani-Kong, Starting Mechani-Kong 2, and then there's another one later on. So that's just the one I went with, and it is repeated in the film, but I thought that was the best track on the soundtrack and in the film.
Nice. I went with King, a track called King Kong Escapes, because it jumped out at me as extremely familiar when I was hearing it. And I was like, what other Godzilla or kaiju movie is this theme from that it seems so iconic? I'm like, it's not just this King Kong Escapes. Like, it's not that I know it from this movie. And that track, King Kong Escapes, hopefully you'll play a section of it that kind of syncs up, but it is a huge section of it, or a huge aspect of it, is borrowed from this movie for the sort of main title King Ghidorah theme in the 1991 Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Or it's kind of like it is used, huge chunks of it are used for King Ghidorah's theme in that movie. Like it's not like exactly the same, but it is almost perfectly lifted. And so like I was hearing this super familiar piece of music in this different context, and I know, you know, Akira Ifukube, he did so many of these tracks and so many of these pieces of music that you do, when you pay attention, you do hear certain of them repeat and imitate and emulate each other over the years and over the decades. And so that was a really fun piece of discovery to find that that track had its origin here, you know.
Well, dang it. Now I'm going to have to go and listen to that again and check it out.
Yeah, if you listen to King Kong Escapes and then you listen to the, you know, you'll find it most easily in the main title track for Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. You'll hear it.
Well, I wanted to give another little shout out. I liked the like main opening title of this film. As soon as the Toho logo like comes on the screen, when it's kind of just like a dark, like ominous tone, like the doo-doo-doo-dum. And then it kind of gets into like a more like happy sounding soundtrack. But I like that main title sound as well.
Yeah, sets the tone.
It does. It does. I'm a sucker for good music, and even if it's a bad film, I'm a sucker for a good or at least decent soundtrack.
Yeah, it's always good to hear some Ifukube.
Absolutely, can never go wrong there. All right, what was your favorite quote or most memorable line from the film?
Oh, I like the dialogue exchange that, you know, they're asking the question of Commander Carl Nelson. You know, Kong was apparently gentle with Miss Watson. May I ask why? And you know, Miss Watson, do you know a reason? You could tell them. And Nelson says it's very easy for us to understand. You see, as ridiculous as it may sound, Kong is a male, and Miss Watson is, well, see for yourselves, gentlemen. I'm sorry, like I'm a sucker for fun, quippy little bits like that. It's like, yeah, it's like she's a gorgeous lady and King Kong is a man, and you know his primal instincts is to be attracted to her. You know, I just like that. That's just fun.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a good line. I ended up going with, it's kind of like a little back and forth. And Doctor Who starts it off and he goes, "This could be our last chance to get Kong. At sea, our robot Kong cannot get him. On ground, the machine will take the real Kong without any doubt." And Madame Piranha goes, "I'm not concerned about which one wins." And that one just gave me a laugh because like Doctor Who's like all about it, trying to get Kong and like have their Mechani-Kong be superior. And the Madame Piranha who's working with him is just like, "I don't even care." So it just gave me
like
a good
it
laugh.
doesn't matter. Yeah.
There
That's
wasn't
great.
a lot of dialogue that I paid attention to in this film, or like that caught me.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean it like that.
Your message received loud and clear, dude. I wasn't paying attention to the dialogue. What are you talking about? Did they even say anything in this movie?
Yeah, what was going on? No, I just
man,
meant like there wasn't anything
It
that
was
like,
it was all Japanese to me, you know.
yeah, it was all blah blah blah. No, there just wasn't anything that really like,
When's the monkey gonna fight the robot monkey? That's all I'm here for.
right, show me the money.
If I want dialogue scenes, I'll watch a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Well, all right, skip it. I'll just I'll move on to my favorite scene. And of course, it's the Kong versus Mechani-Kong battle. You know, they're climbing the tower and whatnot. And I mean, it's a lot of. It's not even a lot of like one on one or like hitting each other. It's a lot of kind of like chasing each other down and like them running from each other or this and that. But of course, I'm going to pick the fight scene. But I did have a quick favorite shout out that I wanted to give, and it's when Kong's standing on the island and he kind of, I don't remember if this is when he starts like walking into the water or getting into the water. Uh, and the sea serpent comes kind of like slithering along in the water, and Kong throws that rock and just bops him right on the head. It gives me a laugh every time.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of a moment of in the Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. There's a very intense sequence near the end. I don't know who's heard, hasn't heard, seen, hasn't seen, so I'm not going to spoil it. But there's a pretty intense scene near the end where a character is in sort of mortal danger, and another character grabs a rock and hits the antagonistic character right in the head with the rock, just throws it at him, beans him in the head. And it's a very intense sequence, but my older brother could never help but die laughing every time it happens because it just felt so random and out of nowhere to just see him like just fling the rock and just hit him right in the head. So, it's just one of those things where something getting hit in the head with a rock out of nowhere is always just a little funny.
It made me come back to Godzilla Kong the New Empire when Kong throws that. And as soon as he throws it, you're like,
Yes.
there's no way. And sure as hell,
Yes.
it just cracks him right on the head.
Yeah, and I love the moment it's in Ebra Horror of the Deep where they're playing like back and forth with the rock, and then Godzilla hits it aside and it just kind of goes flying, and then you cut to this small little sort of outpost building and it just gets randomly smashed by the rock. like what kind of afternoon those guys must have been having. They're just minding their own business and then they just get hammered by that thing. Always makes me laugh.
Yep, just playing some cards, and next thing you know, there's a rock coming through your roof.
Exactly.
So what was your favorite scene of the film?
So my favorite scene is actually, I might have showed my hand a little bit earlier, but it's King Kong versus Gorosaurus, just because it's that iconic kind of recreation of that King Kong versus the T-Rex or T-Rex style monster, and Gorosaurus doesn't get a lot of love and screen time and attention in his handful of appearances in these Showa era films, and this is the closest he gets to kind of being a bit of a main attraction, and if you're going to be being taken out by King Kong is a pretty honorable way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with you. And that fight is so early on that it gets you into the mood for the film right away. That happens at like 14 minutes into the film or something like that.
Yeah, and it's nothing against the rest of the movie or any of the stuff with Mechani-Kong. Mechani-Kong's quite cool, but it's just like it's like that iconic moment. It's like Godzilla firing his atomic breath. It's like other stuff can be cool, but that's iconic, that's important, that's key to the mythos of the character. King Kong has to face a reptile and break its jaws.
I am never against it. I mean, luckily Godzilla has his atomic heat ray or his atomic breath, or he might have been a victim to that as well.
Yeah.
All right, what did we think of the Kong suit in this film? I know we kind of showed our hand a little bit, how it's not very pretty.
It's a masterpiece. It might be the greatest suit ever made. It's flawless, zero criticism, zero notes.
The eyes look great. The teeth are, like he had braces.
So you could just see the soul in his eyes. You just see the life, just a living, breathing creature. It puts Peter Jackson's King Kong to shame.
Yeah, he kind of looks like he's stoned the whole film.
Yeah, he's soulless, kind of that 1,000-yard stare. But I mean, it's a good design. It's tough to kind of compare and contrast with the 62 King Kong suitmation. There's pros and cons perhaps on each, but I think they probably got it a little better the first time round, and that this is something that feels, I don't know, they just clearly doing something that was humanoid-esque, like a gorilla, or even something that we see in reality so often, like gorillas and apes and monkeys and primates and things like that. That's a much harder thing to convincingly do as a man in suit than something like a monster we have no context for. It's tough to kind of see it and think about what we know and have seen from reality and not see the huge discrepancy.
Yeah, because I don't think this film, I mean, I don't think the making of this was rushed or anything. Clearly, they didn't have a lot of money for like the special effects and whatnot. But, being 5 years newer than the suit was in King Kong versus Godzilla, I don't know how you get this much worse when it comes to the Kong suit.
Yeah, it just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like maybe they were someone in the shot calling position was very unhappy with the way that King Kong looked in King Kong versus Godzilla, and maybe they were like, well, let's just go in this other direction. And you do have, Toho released like 8 movies this year, something like that, or eight kaiju movies, or maybe 8 movies in general, or something. But it's like, there are certainly, these films were made at a pretty fast clip, so maybe it was one of these things where it's like, well, we need something different from that because maybe that suit's old and damaged, or maybe we just didn't like that look, but we've got X amount of time to figure it out and make it work. And then you see the final result. It's like, well, perhaps it's a situation of we're shooting with this or we're not shooting with anything. Like you don't know what kind of timelines and parameters they might have been dealing with, and so it's a little unfortunate. But yeah, it's just not a. I don't know. It just it doesn't. This one doesn't really work.
No, for this film, I'm okay with it. But if this design was in any other film, I might be a little upset. If this
Yeah,
was the one we got in King Kong vs. Godzilla, I probably would
yeah.
not like that film as much.
Yeah, that would have been a rough one. That's like, I don't know if they were trying to make him look a bit more friendly, like with the bigger eyes, the way they kind of give Godzilla that sort of like frog head look later on to kind of make him seem a bit more like cartoony and appealing to children. I don't know if they were going for like a friendlier Kong kind of look with that here. I'm not sure, but it didn't quite work out.
And that's possible because this was right around the time that Godzilla was turning into like the more child friendly like hero instead of like the villain. So that would make
Yeah,
sense.
and Rankin Bass, I guess at the time, was overseeing an American King Kong cartoon where it was a bit more of a silly children's kind of a thing. And again, apparently some of their objections to the original Ebera concept was that it didn't reflect and feel like it was similar enough to the cartoon they were doing at the time. And so some of the changes they stipulated were to kind of get it more in line with that, and maybe that involved Kong being a bit more of a like heroic slash cartoony slash sympathetic kind of a portrayal. I'm not sure. Who knows?
It would all make sense. So I can see where that might have come from.
Yeah.
What did you end up thinking of Mechani-Kong in this film?
Certainly cool. It always stung the pride a little bit to, growing up when I learned that Mechani-Kong was a precursor to Mechagodzilla and not the other way around. That it's like, wow, you know, just as King Kong, debuted before Godzilla, but Godzilla sort of became the much more prolific kind of character with many more numerous entries. So too, Mechani-Kong kind of got there first and sort of being the robot doppelganger of an iconic character. But Mechagodzilla has a legacy and popularity and history of appearances that far eclipses humble Mechani-Kong.
Yeah, I don't know unless you're talking to somebody who's like a kaiju fan or like a monster movie fan. If you mention Mechani-Kong, they'd be like, "There was never a Mecha Kong. Like, what are you talking about?"
Yeah, exactly. What are you talking about? But it's not a bad design, and it feels a little bit like you can kind of see, different eras have different ways that robots were kind of often put together and constructed and showcased on film, and it kind of has that sort of, it feels of the 60s kind of robot with kind of, you see robots kind of like the old school robot cartoons like Gigantor or whatever, and it's kind of, it feels like of that kind of variety, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I liked it. When you compare it to Mechagodzilla or something like that, you're not doing any favors. That film came out another 8 years down the road, or 7 years down the road for the first one, 8 for Terror of Mechagodzilla. I mean, this is just the King Kong suit looks cheap. Mechani-Kong looks cheap. So I mean, this is just, in my opinion, it's a fun, cheesy '67 King Kong film made by Toho, and I mean, it did well. So I can get over the looks, but I think it'd be cool to bring back a Mechani-Kong and see what they could do with it, And I'm not saying bring it back in the MonsterVerse, but maybe like a solo Kong movie down the road or something. I think that'd be a cool callback and a fun nod to this film.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we might agree to disagree on that. Nothing against it or anything, but I'm personally not dying, because the sad thing is that nowadays, if they were to do a Mecha Kong, Mechani-Kong, Robot Kong, everyone would perceive it, even though it's the OG compared to Mechagodzilla. Everyone's perception would be, oh, they're just knocking off Mechagodzilla. Oh, they did Mechagodzilla, now they got to do Mecha Kong. Like, that would be the perception, and it would be a tedious kind of a thing to kind of mulch through with viewers and audiences. And Mechani-Kong just doesn't have the legacy. Like, Mechagodzilla in and of itself has a bit of a legacy that Mechagodzilla appears in Ready Player One, for crying out loud.
Right.
From Steven Spielberg. It's like Mechani-Kong does not have that legacy that warrants, like, when are you gonna have Mechani-Kong? So I don't know. Not saying never. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit that if they did it in a MonsterVerse movie, I'd probably be all for it, and I'd probably have a good time with it and everything. But it's like, I'm not dying for it to happen.
I'm just one of those suckers that any monster you want to bring back, or for like a modern adaptation, I probably won't say no.
Yeah, give me my boy Anguirus.
Stop it. We'll go on a rant here. Give me some Gigan. Give me some Biolante.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, we don't. Oof, jeez.
Whatever monster movie it is, I will take it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, how about we get into some final thoughts for this film and see where that takes us?
Sure.
So I think this is, I think it's a fun film. Are people going to like this? Again, as I said with the last one, Son of Kong, I mean, if you're having a marathon of the Kong films, throw this one on as well, because if you can get through Son of Kong, and King Kong versus Godzilla was awesome a couple years before this, then you might as well throw this one on and see Kong fight a mecha version of himself and enjoy it. Enjoy the cheesiness that it is. But if you're not a Kong fan, or you're not a kaiju fan or anything like that, this film is probably not for you. But give it a try anyway. You might like it. You might get a couple good laughs out of it. But I mean, I like this film. It's not one of my favorites, but I like it for what it is.
Yeah, and we've done this sort of comparative thing before, where it's like, Son of Kong to King Kong, and Godzilla raids again to Godzilla, and this sort of, King Kong escapes to King Kong versus Godzilla kind of feels a little bit of that same way. It's like King Kong versus Godzilla is iconic and awesome and all kinds of, fantastic, and then you have King Kong escapes, which is kind of just like, oh, it's like, you have King Kong versus Godzilla, and then that other one they did, and then that other little King Kong movie they did that was kind of like weird and not really well known and isn't really terribly well regarded or well remembered. It's like, it's just kind of like that same sort of thing. And in the same way that it's like you have King Kong up here and Son of Kong down here, and Godzilla up here and Godzilla raids again kind of down here. I do think that it's very much like King Kong versus Godzilla is up here, and then King Kong escapes is down there. It's just kind of the vibe that I get. I thought one thing that I missed bringing up when we were talking about King Kong in this movie is that they specifically mentioned that he's 60 feet tall. So he's at a whole different, like, in terms of sort of canon and lore and continuity, this is a totally different iteration of King Kong than what we saw in King Kong versus Godzilla. This is a 60-foot creature, so his scale is all different. He's not matching Godzilla's height at 160 feet. It's a whole different it's sort of like a middle ground. It's more, you know, it's more of a middle ground between the sort of usual King Kong size and the Toho size. So that's an interesting take, but it kind of makes it a little bit less of a traditional kaiju sized creature.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's as soon as you said it, I was like, yeah, in King Kong versus Godzilla, Kong was 150, 160 feet tall. And in this one, him being only 60 feet tall. And I mean, you can definitely tell the scale difference in this film as well. Once he's like when they're around the humans and whatnot, so you
Yeah,
can definitely see that he's not.
and the smaller the monster, the more difficult it is to do the sort of sets and miniatures around him, because the smaller the monster is, the more large and detailed the miniature buildings and sets and everything have to be. And that's why part of the thing in the Heisei movies, part of the technical reasons they kept making Godzilla bigger, was so that the miniatures could be smaller relative to a man in a suit, and so they would be smaller and less detailed and quicker to build and all that sort of thing. So it's like when you have a smaller scale monster, the buildings and surrounding, cityscapes are larger relative to that monster. So they become a bit more of a complex effect to pull off.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think me and Chris are on the same page here. I think if it's a recommend if you're a Kong fan or a monster movie fan. Other than that, we might be telling you to stay away from this one unless you just want to have a random movie night.
Yeah, if you're doing your marathon, if you've got to do your due diligence to watch every King Kong movie, give it a go. If you're really, hyper indulgent on Japanese giant monster movies, certainly a Japanese King Kong movie is a rare thing to come by. So there's novelties to it. There's unique elements to it that make it, a sort of piece of history, but it's a bit more of a historical curiosity and curio and just something to kind of look up and be like, oh, well, what's that like? That exists. That's an interesting thing. And then you kind of watch it and it kind of doesn't really quite live up to the unique nature of it. But it's fun to see once. I don't know how many times you'll be compelled to revisit it.
Well, since those 2.5 times of me rewatching it for the podcast, I have not went back to it in the last week or two,
Yeah.
but we'll see. It might be something,
Yeah. Yeah, are we gonna excommunicate this one from the canon? We gonna strike it from the holy scriptures?
all the movies I have, probably like 70% of them I watch at least like once a year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you're on this council, but we don't grant you the rank of master. Oh, that's a Star Wars reference. I don't know if you know Star Wars or not.
Yep, I know that one. I do know that
Yeah.
one.
It's very much that. It's like, yeah, you're a Toho kaiju movie, but you're not one of the rest of them. You're not up there with the rest of the Godzilla movies.
Nope, you are a step below, sir.
Yeah, the next rung down. Go hang out with Gamera or something. I love Gamera. Disclosure: I love Gamera.
as he's knocking him on the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, second banana can still be a good banana. All right.
That's true. This is true. Well, as with the previous Kong film, this film did not have a direct sequel, and the King Kong franchise would be put on hiatus for nearly 20 years until the release of our next film, which is the 1976 remake of King Kong, released December 17th, 1976. And that is a film that was very near and dear to my heart when I was a kid. So we will see on the next episode what I think of that one today. So, Chris, as always, we'll get you out of here. I'll say thank you for joining me, as it's always fun, and I really look forward to this next episode, the 76 King Kong film, because I do not watch that one very often anymore. So getting a rewatch of that one and digging into that one's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute for me as well. Really excited to give that one another go and see what that's all about.
Absolutely. Can't wait to hear your opinion on it as well. But until then, again, I will say thank you. Thank anyone who's out there listening. As always, join us on our Facebook page and on Spotify. We always have our polls underneath each episode. Give us a vote, comment, whatever you want to do.
Like, share, and subscribe.
always help us out here. We are doing this all for free for your and our entertainment. So again, thanks, Chris, for joining me. Thanks to anyone who's out there listening. And until next time.
Kong! Kong! King Kong!
Don't call. Yeah, let him go.
But he's going.
He's going home. I think he's had enough of what we call civilization.